the most important tool for storm chasing is not your phone, nor your camera, or what websites you go to for forecasting. It is your vehicle. With that, there's a lot of conversation in the community about different types of vehicles, different attributes of vehicles, and all sorts of things. We can go anywhere with this conversation, but I have a claim that is not too far off, I think, and it's something that's not talked about enough in storm chasing. My claim is this: storm chasing has to be the worst hobby or interest for any vehicle owner. Like I said, this is something that I've thought about for a while now, and when you really look at the details of what goes into storm chasing, it is actually insane with what we do with vehicles. And I mean the textbook definition of insane, as that is a word that is often overused nowadays. The easiest way to start this is from a financial responsibility perspective. Fundamentally, automobiles are a method of transportation that gets us from point A to B. They're a personal mode of transport, and honestly, as Americans, we're kind of forced into this realm just given how our transportation infrastructure has evolved. For 99% of the country, most people use some level of automobile, whether it be buses, cars, trucks, etc., to get from point A to point B. Sure, there are trains in certain cities and stuff like that, but so much of our transportation infrastructure is based around the car. Naturally, as Americans, we've evolved cars from being more than that fundamental tool to get us from point A to point B to being extensions of our personality. Somehow they have become one of the projectable status symbols that anyone can have. And the key word there is project, as oftentimes people will go into insane amounts of debt to buy a vehicle they simply cannot afford on paper. Unlike buying a home and getting a mortgage to pay off that home, instead we're just going into debt buying some crazy car that is outside of what should be our budget, and Americans are going into insane debt because the car is such a fixture in the American way of life. Cars are a depreciating asset, unlike the home. So we're going into debt for something that's losing value. And storm chasing, at a very surface level, if we're looking purely at the perspective of automobiles, is the surefire way to depreciate your car at speed run type status. I don't think there's anything quite remotely close to storm chasing that can get what the lot value was of that vehicle when you bought it to zero faster than storm chasing. So how does this happen? All right, let's start with just the sheer amount of miles that you drive in storm chasing. For perspective, I bought my 2019 Subaru Crosstrek as a certified pre-owned in March of 2021 with 11,000 miles on it. Today, I have nearly 150,000 miles on that vehicle, so roughly around 30,000 miles per year in that span. The average American drives 13,000 miles per year, so I've essentially doubled that standard, and I'm not even someone that storm chases that much on a frequent basis compared to some of my other peers and contemporaries. I will say the saving grace in this aspect is that it's mainly highway driving, which is the most forgiving type of driving on a vehicle, as everything's very steady state. Stop and go city traffic is definitely much more detrimental to the overall life of the car, but nevertheless, you're still subjecting your vehicle to wear and tear. Of course, in this time frame, because you're driving so much, you're having to do maintenance much more frequently than everyone else. So you're doing several oil changes a year. You're doing a brake job every so often, probably way more frequently than anyone else. You're definitely getting tires more often than everyone else, and all the other consumables that go into maintaining a vehicle. You're just speed running through all of those maintenance things that you have to take care of when you're storm chasing. Now, as I said earlier, most of the driving is highway driving, but you have to consider some of the conditions that we end up in while chasing. We're in some of the more remote corners of the country at times, and roads are not exactly the most well-maintained in certain areas. Think of the giant potholes, the dirt roads, the gravel roads. All of these types of conditions are naturally going to cause significant wear on the car. I can just picture in my head those washboard gravel roads that you run into sometimes, just shaking your car from stem to stern, and you feel like a bolt is gonna like pop out at any second. You definitely abuse your car at moments in time. To mention too, you're getting little chips and stuff from rocks being kicked up from tractor trailers, or even all the times you pull over on the side of the road, you're puncturing tires with all the debris that collects on the side of the road that nobody else drives over. There's just so many of these little, death by 1,000 cuts that happens to these vehicles as we're just continually driving them basically into the ground. Because we're on the road so often, there's also a number of encounters that we get to see. Obviously, we're in hazardous conditions, so the heightened risk of crashing is already there. But then there's such things as like wildlife. I can count the amount of people that have wrecked because of wildlife on more than the 2 hands that I have available. I know so many people that have either hit a deer, a boar, a pronghorn, any type of these animals, even birds like turkeys and pheasants. You can do catastrophic damage with a decent sized bird. So it doesn't take necessarily a deer or a hog to cause this type of damage. There's just so many things when you're driving that you can run into that happens to run across the road. And of course, there's the elephant in the room, which is the storm itself. All it takes is one good hail core to pretty much completely total your vehicle just with bodywork alone. If you're running into a good storm that has baseball to grapefruit size hail, you're going to just dent every panel on that car conceivable and probably lose a window or 2 in the process. Yes, some storm chasers see windshields as consumables, but if you're driving a more modern vehicle that has, the forward-facing sensors like the Subaru EyeSight, you have to get your car's, forward-facing sensors recalibrated every single time you put on a new windshield, which is like a $200 to $300 charge on its own. So there's just so many things in the storm itself that can also cause damage to your vehicle. Obviously, the more extreme examples are like wind-borne debris at times and strong, straight line winds, or obviously worst case scenario, you get hit by a tornado. But there is simply just so much that goes into running down a vehicle when storm chasing. Just from, like I said, the sheer amount of miles driven to the hazards that go along with it. It's just an absolute torture for a vehicle. To round things out for this video, to kind of back up my point, I decided to take to Twitter and ask some people, hey, tell me your vehicle horror stories, and we got some good ones in here. Apologies up front if I didn't include yours. There were a lot of great submissions, but just wanted to kind of get a nice breadth of things just to drive the point home. Tyler Spalding blew a tire during the eye wall of Milton, tried to change it in the Calm Eye in Sarasota, finally got the big Yukon on a jack stand when the Sting Jet roared through, spent the back half totally immobilized, perpendicular to the wind next to an oak tree that got shredded. So obviously, wind-borne debris damage is a problem, and of course, driving over debris is always going to be an issue. Storm chasers love puncturing tires just because think about all the stuff that ends up on the road in a storm. Jacob McMillan, great storm chaser, by the way, you should check out his stuff, said an expensive mistake and put a video of being up close and personal with a tornado. Tree gets shredded, and ultimately a telephone pole snaps and whacks off his Starlink dish and probably caused other damage to his vehicle. He's a fellow Subaru Crosstrek driver, by the way. Another Milton story from friend of the channel, Kelton Henderson. Tree branch came down in front of me chasing Hurricane Milton as it was making landfall. Punched a hole in my car's radiator and knocked off its mounting pins, stranding me for several days. Had to ride out the rest of the storm in a car that couldn't move. And he posted a picture of the damage caused to his radiator. So that's the thing too, just stuff that ends up blown over is going to be a problem, especially for anything that's exposed on the underside of the vehicle or even remotely in the front of the vehicle. Radiators are always the first thing to go when you hit something head on. Connor Steins here said wrong place, wrong time. There's some context behind this one here. He actually was not in the vehicle at the time when this tornado took place. He was smart and sheltered in a structure during a nocturnal tornado chase. So good on you for having the judgment to do that. Unfortunately, the car was the victim of the tornado. Just a example and heavy reminder that storm chasing is still very dangerous, especially operating in close proximity to tornadoes. Longtime storm chaser Ben Holcomb just puts Bowdle. We covered the Bowdle incident on the main channel before, and he was among those that ended up in the farmer's field. And yeah, an extreme situation for sure, but hey, not out of the realm of possibilities in storm chasing, with roads just seemingly coming to an end. Joshua Conaway, in the Kit Carson tornado this year, he had a nice, beautiful shot of the updraft base in the tornado, and sure enough, giant hailstone comes down, shatters his windshield. DFW Storm Chasers, places not to drive your truck, and a Southwest Oklahoma ditch, and shows his truck absolutely caked in mud tires. That's the thing about Southwest Oklahoma, and definitely some of these areas of the plains. The mud just clings to any type of tire. It doesn't matter what you have or what kind of 4x4 you got. That mud is unforgiving. So I get comments all the time saying, hey, you should be driving a 4x4 truck in XYZ, should have all these things. Yes, okay, sure. I introduce you Southwest Oklahoma mud. That's been rained on. You just can't drive on dirt roads after they've been rained on in the plains. That's just rule number one. I'll take my fuel efficiency and avoid the dirt roads at the end of the day, because there's no vehicle besides a tractor that's getting out of that. Friend of the channel, Zach, said, got stuck in Meadville after trees fell plus flooding on the roads. When it got cleared and got out of town, night was falling, called the chase, and long story short, a deer got confused in the wind and hail and tried to jump over a car and ultimately ended up in front of his car. So there you go, wildlife entering the picture. Just a classic storm chaser tale and unfortunate way to do serious damage to a vehicle. So with all of these things said, you can understand what I mean by storm chasing is just simply the number one way to depreciate a vehicle's value. Off-roading might be another close second or something like that, but man, it is actually insane from a financial literacy standpoint to do this to your vehicle. Anywho, that's it for this second channel video. Be sure to subscribe to May 3rd here, and of course, June 1st, the main channel. And yeah, I'm gonna try to do a couple more of these more off-the-cuff, fun style videos. If you have any suggestions, leave them down in the comments below. And with that said, thank you for watching, and I'll catch you on the next one.